kid, looks pretty healthy, pretty strong. I figured he might go 5 or 6 blocks. But at some point, this kid's turning around, coming back to school. I'll point him in the right direction, and that will probably be the end of Scott's running career. But if you read the book, you know that's not what happened. Scott ran 5 miles that day. And it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fast. Well, I ran next to the kid, and you know, he was persistent. He was determined to finish that run. And he impressed me. He won a spot on the team. And there's no way I was sending him away. And once I said he was on the team, an amazing thing happened. All the guys on the team said, well, this kid's on the team. Because coach says he's on the team. And I think that's part of the leadership, that you set an example and say, look, I don't care where this kid's from, and I don't care what he looks like, and I don't care who his parents are or whether or not he has parents. He showed up and he worked hard, so he gets to be on our team. So he earned a spot. And eventually, within the next 2 days, he also earned a nickname. Of course, it's in the title of the book. And I can't tell you that it wasn't an insult when it first came out, because I'm pretty sure it was an insult. And if you know nicknames, sometimes that's how they start out. Sometimes really good nicknames start out and somebody just yells something at you and insults you, and somehow the insult turns around and becomes a term of endearment. And that's certainly the case here. And I did an interview on the radio with Scott Krieger, and he said, what's with that name? Isn't that kind of a wonderful thing to call a kid? You called him Animal? Well, yeah, I know it sounds bad, but the truth is that he was okay with it, and we were too. And he just became the animal. And I think, you know, if you compare those pictures, I think you can see there is certainly a resemblance. And he earned that nickname, and he loved the nickname, and he truly belonged with us. And eventually, you know, he became this important part of our team. He became this central figure on our team. And the '85 season was supposed to be a rebuilding year. It was supposed to be a year. I don't do this typically.
You don't do this typically? You made it like 15 minutes longer than you usually do.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for pointing that out. I usually have to stop. I put the easy stuff first. I get to the hard stuff later on, when I'm a little more relaxed, I hope. Scott not only made our team, he made our varsity, which was a shock to everybody. Certainly a shock to me and anybody who knew anything about running. And he ends up on our varsity, in our varsity picture taken by the Stevens Point Journal, back when the Stevens Point Journal used to take pictures of people. And Scott's in the middle of the picture. He was always in the middle of the picture. We didn't put him there. He just always showed up there. He just knew he was supposed to be there. I don't know if he was supposed to be there, he wanted to be there. And I don't know why he looks so owly here, because he never did. And that's sort of out of spirit for him. So typically he was the happiest guy there. So we actually build a team around this kid. And for me, it's sort of like finding a Rembrandt at a flea market. You know, it can happen, but you don't think it's ever going to happen. That, you know, this kid just had this great value, and nobody could see it until we put a varsity uniform on it, and all of a sudden things started to change, and we had this great season. I used the term unforgettable on the cover, and I think, you know, that's kind of a term that gets used on too many book covers, but I think it applied here. I also like to use the word unbelievable, and I think that's a word that some people use that all the time, and everything is not unbelievable, but this is a story where I think that term unbelievable really fits. I know that, you know, there's that hockey movie that they call Miracle, and I'm not sure that was a miracle. I don't think, you know, I think we overuse that word too, but magical? Yes, I think this was a magical season for us, and we ended up winning meets. We started by winning our conference meet, and you can see Scott there with his all-conference certificate, made first team all-conference. He's clutching his medal in his hand. He's got a death grip on it. He held it onto it for a full day before he lost it, and I had to get a hold of our conference commissioner to get him another one, and then we had to sew that onto his letter jacket once he got the letter jacket. So we were actually front page news back when we could make front page news, and I think it's just a wonderful trip back in time, and I think Jim Menzel can probably appreciate when the Journal was a great newspaper, and they did things like this, and people cut these things out and they saved them for years and years and years. I'm sure I don't have the only copy of this. I'm sure John Cipollina's got a copy somewhere at home. So just one of those great things that we were actually front page news, and people knew about us here in town, and some people were starting to learn this story as we worked our way up to become one of the top ranked teams in Wisconsin. We built a highly competitive team, and we built it around this special needs kid, and we had this interesting relationship. And if you look at it, it's one of my favorite pictures. It's in the book, and that's Scott and I walking along, and he's sort of my shadow. He's sort of a mirror image of me, and we're studying a results sheet from an invitational, and we're really in step, side by side, and it was a father-son kind of thing. It was more than just a coach-athlete kind of thing. I was the guy there to protect him, and I'm sure he was the guy there that wanted to make me proud. And he certainly did. And I think this is, you know, it speaks to what coaching is about for those of us that do it, that we look for more than just winning some trophies in a trophy case and getting our name of our team in the paper or something like that. We do it because we have these kind of interesting relationships. And I don't know that I realized at the time how close our relationship was and how much he probably looked up to me and saw me as a father figure and a role model. But as I got older, I began to appreciate the value of that, and I think that was one of the things about this season that made it especially special for me. We had this great season, and it was going along pretty smoothly until the state of Wisconsin decided that they were going to take Scott from us and close down his group home, and they sent him, we're going to send him off to Oconomowoc. And Jim Krieger down at the newspaper heard the story and came and did this article. And since the book has come out, I've had half a dozen people come up to me and tell me they remember this article. They remember reading about Scott back in 1985, 30 years ago. People remember some of these stories because it was one of those things that was so odd, it was so strange that people couldn't believe that the state was going to take this kid away from us. So we got permission. Our athletic director, Andy Anderson, got permission to keep Scott for an extra week. And then as luck had it, it rained. They postponed the state meet. So the next week, here's the headline. And of course, people in town starting to wonder what's going on with these guys. Why can't they get this poor kid to a state meet? And the course was underwater. They canceled it. They said, well, we'll do it next weekend. Well, next weekend, it snowed. And the only reason we got there is because our athletic director, Andy Anderson, had gotten us a coach bus. And we managed to get down to Madison in this blizzard with a guy named Tom Rath driving the bus, who happens to be sitting in the front row here. And the next slide is just so weird, I just had to throw it in here. My brother showed up that day, and he had his camera, and he took this picture. And I can't explain it. And I don't know why. I just don't know how or why this van ended up in the parking lot right next to our bus, and we jogged by it and said, what the heck is that about? Some of the guys said, well, maybe that's the van that's taking Scott from us. Maybe they painted his name on the front of it. I'm like, no, I don't think they did that. We never did figure it out. So maybe if, Beth, if you could run the plates on that thing. So see what you can do. Maybe we can find these people. So here we are. The dramatic scene in Madison, Wisconsin at Yahari Hills Golf Course. There we are. I'm giving a few last-minute words of advice, or at least trying to calm the guys down. And I think they're mostly listening to me, except Scott, who's the guy facing the camera. He's the guy with the blue face mask on. I'm pretty sure he's not listening to me. I don't think he heard a word I said. We got to that course, and he was ready to go. And there wasn't any advice that he cared to listen to. I think his ADD had just kicked in, and we just couldn't get him to the line soon enough. So here he is, delivering one of his many high fives. He loved to high five people. He'd take your hand off if you weren't careful. He'd get so cranked up before the race, and he had that silly face mask that reeked of nicotine, and he pulled that thing on, and he was going to be our superhero that day. And he certainly was. This picture looks like it was photoshopped. It's not. That was it. For some reason, it looked like the world was about to end, just as the guys went to the line. And I remember standing on top of this little hill and looking down there and saying, oh my God, I like a snowstorm, but I was a little bit overwhelmed by that. And I thought, you know, enough is enough. We can stop at any time with this snow business. But it actually got a little worse as things went on. And this is one of the great pictures from that day. The lead group, about probably 600 or 800 meters into the race, Scott, as I said, had a tendency to get a little bit too fired up, and you can't really see him in the picture, but if you count back to the 7th runner, you'll see a blue hat. And there's just the top of a blue stocking cap, and that's him. Why in the world he was in the top 7, I'll never know, but once he'd done that, once you're on the tiger's back, you just have to keep going. And that's exactly what he did. And here is the best and really only photo we have of Scott during that race, because Scott didn't have parents. His parents weren't there to take pictures. This was taken by John Ciplina's dad, because that's John running right next to Scott. Scott's number 204, if you can read the number, obviously. He's got the face mask on, and he's hanging on by his fingernails for the second half of this race, and just determined to finish this race at all costs. And I think this picture is probably the most dramatic taken on the day. Oh. And if you read the book and you didn't get the idea of how awful this snowstorm was, that certainly was it. And it was incredible that these guys could find their way, and that I really at some points had no idea if my guys were still in the race. I lost track of them at some points. I would yell to other guys, hey, did you see him? Did you see him? Some of our guys wore orange stocking caps, and that helped a lot. But once they got 20 yards from you, you didn't know what was going on. And so it was just a really kind of a crescendo moment at the end of this story. And then when the race finished, we got everybody together out in the snow, and that's our whole group. That was our whole team. We had 22 guys, and I think there's 20 guys in the picture. And we got out there for a group photo, and the next one is, of course, a bit of a spoiler alert for those of you that didn't read the book. We're on the stage at Newfoundland High School, and there I am with the trophy, and I remember having that trophy in my hand for about 7/10 of a second. I took it and I spun, and I was like, you know, Rogers handing off to Lacey. It was just handed in that trophy, and that kid, I mean, it's a terrible picture. It's a blur, but you know what? That whole day was a blur. That whole season was a blur. And I mean, if you ever saw a picture of pure joy on a person's face, I mean, that's it. And Scott then took that trophy and kind of danced across the stage, lifted it above his head. He walked out to the edge of the stage. He held it up here. And just this last weekend, I was at a cross-country meet, and the coach from Darlington High School came up to me, told me he read the book, and he told me that he was there on that day. And he said he remembered that kid. He remembered the kid with the trophy, and he said he remembered thinking, what's wrong with that kid? And then he realized that this is a special needs kid. And he said the people around him sensed that it was a special needs kid. And he said people just erupted. They cheered louder for us. People don't typically cheer for us very much, especially in the 80s. We were kind of disliked because we were that good. But I remember people cheering loudly, and it wasn't just our JV guys, it was other people that joined in. And then this is that final picture. This is the last picture we have of Scott and I standing on the stage, and we're listening to somebody say something. I don't know if it was interesting or not. I look like I'm interested. Scott seems to be kind of clued into it, whatever the person was saying. And then right after this, we walked him out to the bus, and he was taken from us. He didn't go in the animal van. He went in this other ugly vehicle, and he was taken from us. And so we were left behind with a trophy and an empty bus seat, and just this memory, this really, really great story. And I knew on that day that this was a great story. And I remember saying to a friend of mine, somebody ought to write a book about this. And I didn't know who that was going to be. I didn't think it was going to be me, because I wasn't a writer. In fact, I spent my whole life avoiding writing. I was pretty sure that I couldn't do it even if I tried. So I sort of put this on the shelf for 25 years. And then when I retired from teaching in 2010, that's the moment I realized that it was either now or never. I was going to have to write this, because I'm not getting any younger. And I thought, I gotta get this thing on paper, even if it's really awful. I'm gonna write it for me, I'm gonna write it for my wife and for my daughter. I'm gonna get this thing on paper, and I'm gonna try to tell this story. And I knew that I had 2 of the 3 ingredients. Number 1, I had a great story. Number 2, I was sure that I could tell it. Number 3, could I write it? I didn't think so, but I knew I had to try. And so I sat down, I got myself a new laptop, and I hacked away at it for a couple of weeks. And when I got it done, I gave it to my wife, Cheryl, and she said nice things. That was good. And I gave it to my daughter, Beth, and she sent it back and said some not very nice things. She loved the story. She just didn't like my writing. She didn't like my punctuation. She didn't like my spelling. It was a long list of things she didn't like. But the great thing was, she sent back this long list of things she did like. A long list of things that she really thought I needed to expand on, things that I needed to do better, things she knew I could do better. And so I worked at it. I wrote it a second time, and I sent it back to her, and she sent it back and said, no, you're gonna have to do it over again. And I think that's the point at which I got pretty frustrated with this. I thought, well, geez, you know, I didn't sign on for this rewrite and rewrite and rewrite thing. Maybe I should quit. And I seriously thought about quitting, but then I realized that, you know, I'm a guy who spent my entire adult life telling kids in classes and kids on my team that they should never give up, that if they hit a brick wall, they should fight their way through it, that they should always put in a little bit more effort, and that, you know, they can achieve success if they're persistent enough. So, you know, all those words over all the years came back to haunt me, and it's like, all right, so now I'm stuck. I got to do this over again. And I think it was 4 or 5 rewrites, and finally Beth said, you know, this is okay. You can go on to chapter 2. And I did. And it was a long, long process. And, you know, along the way, I spent some time reading things written by real authors, and I was trying to break the code. And it's sort of amazing. You know, I've done a lot of reading in my life, but usually I just read for the content. And then once I started reading for how people actually build sentences and paragraphs and how they knit things together, and this wonderful thing that authors do when they figure out a way to get you into the story. And boy, when I read some of that stuff, it was powerful. And I said, wow, if I can do any of that, I'll be really happy. And obviously, it's pretty hard to duplicate some of those famous authors. But you know, I had a clue of what I wanted to shoot for, and I had a goal, and I feel like I kept getting better. And Beth kept sending back chapter after chapter and saying, you know what? You're getting better at this. There's fewer mistakes. There's fewer problems along the way. And eventually I got to the point where I was pretty confident that I was going to finish this. And I got to the point where I actually enjoyed writing. Cheryl would leave to go teach. She'd leave the house, and I'd go grab my laptop, and I'd sit down at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I got this from Stephen King. He said he writes for 4 hours a day, locks himself in a room. So I locked myself in the living room on a comfortable couch for 4 hours. I didn't answer the phone, I didn't go to the bathroom, I didn't get a snack, I didn't do anything except write. And then Cheryl would come home and say, how did it go? And I would say, pretty good. And she'd say, how much did you write? And I would usually say, oh, about a page. And sometimes I was lying, because sometimes it was a half a page. And sometimes it was, one time it was a paragraph. I wrestled with a paragraph for 4 hours, and it was tough. But I knew I was going to get this thing done because I had this story that I had to get out of me, and I had to get it out on paper, and I was just so thrilled that it was really a group activity between my wife Cheryl and her always positive feedback, and my daughter Beth, who very often gave me the push and the criticism that I needed. But I think more importantly, what she did is she had a really good eye for those things that needed to be in the story. Those things that could be better, those things that I should include. She encouraged me to use a little more creativity, have a little more fun with my writing. And I thought, geez, nobody ever told me I should have fun with my writing. I thought it's just supposed to be a grind. And some of my early writing, I think, I've described it as like a police report. That, you know, just the facts, man. Like Joe Friday used to say. And then I got to the point where I could expand on that. And I got to the point where I really felt like I was writing and enjoying the process. And about a year into the project, you know, we had sort of a rough draft. And then it took another 2 years to kind of get it done. And it was really 3 years in the whole process of this whole thing of getting us to this point. where we actually had a book, and we went out to get it published, and